Hello. Today, this class will help us better understand the role played by protected areas in Africa. The additional reading for this class is once again the annual report on the state of protected areas entitled The Protected Planet Report. You can also read the reports of the studies done by PAPACO in Africa in the past few years. They are on our website, www.papaco.org. Protected areas are known today to be a useful tool to manage and to preserve the biological diversity. Some people even say they are the cornerstone of conservation strategies. This explains their dramatic increase in number and in surface over the recent years. These protected areas preserve species, sometimes threatened species, as we can see here, specific ecosystems, or rare habitats. They are trying to preserve the environment in its natural state, or at least with as little change as possible. This historical vision of parks and reserves has changed, though from glass case protected zones, protected areas, or at least some of them, are gradually becoming territories of sustainable environment management, where human activities, for instance fishing, when compatible, and this is very important to underline, can be integrated into the management of protected areas and therefore strengthen their future. There is obviously a paradox that everyone can notice. While the number of protected areas on the planet is growing, biodiversity continues to decline. Let's have a look at the census analysis of large mammal species in some parks of Africa, like in West Africa. As shown here, their number decreased by 85% in 35 years, and today there is only 15% of what was left in the 70s, when the number was already quite low. Let's remember that this is the case in protected areas. Imagine a situation elsewhere. Let's also look at the analysis of the Panthera NGO in the Mole National Park in Ghana. We can see that the changes in number of some herbivores is catastrophic. We go from this situation to this one. There are now many species whose population is more important outside the areas that are supposed to protect them than inside, like the tigers, for example. The number of tigers remaining in the wild, more or less 3,000 in India, in Malaysia, Russia, etc., is below the number of tigers held in captivity in the gardens of individuals in the United States. It is estimated at over 5,000. An example closer to us is the Oryx dama that we can see in this picture. He has vanished into thin air. It only exists in captivity, whereas before it was found in Senegal, in Mali, and in Niger. However, it is currently subject to a reintroduction program in Senegal and in Chad. The question we can legitimately ask is whether protected areas are really useful. I'll let you think about it. Take 5 minutes to answer this question for yourself based on your field knowledge. Gather your arguments. This is not a pointless question because critics of protected areas are everywhere. Among the reasons mentioned to explain the situation, first there was the fact that some protected areas are not effective, either because they were poorly built, because they lack the means, or because they are poorly managed. Anyway, they do not achieve their conservation goals. Some protected areas are even purely virtual, hardly existing as a single line on a map, such as the giraffe reserve of Ansango Meneka in Mali that I'm showing you here, where there has been no giraffe for a long time, and, in reality, no reserve anymore either. Here we can clearly see the territories outside and inside the protected area are the same. There is no difference between the villages and the park. There are many other examples like this one. We will come back to it. Another reason commonly mentioned focuses on the system of protected areas globally and not on individual sites anymore. Often incomplete, which means that they do not include all places where strong biodiversity issues exist. These systems are also not often representative. Take, for example, Benin, whose map we can see here, and where the 2 national parks in the country, the Pendjari, here, or the W, are in the same ecosystem in the far north of the country. Consequently, other areas that are different and potentially valuable are not protected. Finally, it is these territories' governance that is questioned, especially their failure to gain support of the local populations directly affected by their existence, making their protection all the more difficult. This concept is taking more and more space with the development of protected areas of Category 6, where the exploration of natural resources is possible, as we'll soon see. But be careful. It is not necessarily always realistic to think we can consistently associate local participants. Some protected areas are created to prevent all human activity, making the local population's involvement rather complicated. But the functions, the roles of the protected areas, go beyond their simple and essential role of preservation. These are places of recreation and of nature discovery, and they raise awareness among people, young and old, on the challenges of conservation. This is an absolutely essential function, often underestimated, while the future of these territories, of our protected areas, actually depends on the support of others. They also offer relatively preserved territories to conduct the necessary research actions, helping us better understand the world around us. They provide goods and services to us all, to people living in and around protected areas, of course, which is easy to understand, such as forest produce, bamboo, honey, medicinal plants, etc. But they also provide to distant places, because they play a role in purifying water, in keeping the air devoid of human pollution, etc., etc. In this respect, they are also actors of climate change mitigation and open laboratories of nature's evolution during these changes. There is a lot to learn about the ecosystem's ability to adapt. That's what we call resilience. Protected areas also preserve sites of cultural and spiritual value, and increasingly, culture and nature intertwine to form the global value of the territory. For example, some archaeological sites, like here in the Great Rift Valley in Kenya, are preserved within protected areas. Another interesting example comes from Madagascar, where some people recognize lemurs, like the Sivaka and their ancestors, and thus provide them very strict protection. Culture and nature can therefore totally support each other. Finally, these territories represent today's commitment to the future, the ability to put aside some resources and wealth for future generations that may meet the needs when the time comes. It's not the least important function of protected areas, but it's certainly not the easiest to understand. Protected areas have so many roles that add up, as we have just seen. Yet they are not sufficient to stem the erosion of biodiversity, and fortunately, there are other environment-friendly forms of territory development which may also contribute to conservation. For example, sustainable practices in agriculture, balanced management of forests, and infrastructure limiting their impact on species and on places. All this must be added up in an attempt to achieve the expected results, and we can't rely only on protected areas if we wish to preserve our environment as a whole. So, fortunately, the areas of highest priority for conservation are generally well known today. There are several ways to identify them. For instance, the ecoregions we can see here, which were determined by WWF. Another approach is key biodiversity areas, the most well-known of which are the important bird areas, defined by BirdLife, and that we can see on this map in green. Based on this data, it is actually quite easy to prioritize where and how to intervene. One way to do it is certainly to create new protected areas, but then again, they alone cannot meet all the challenges, and nature conservation must be understood as a whole. Protected areas are only one aspect of it. That's the end of the class. The next episode will focus on the precise definition of these protected areas. Have a great day.